Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We kind of got disconnected, and then inshallah we'll be starting again. So what you have, we've got two different things right here. In the beginning, we're going to be talking about the general rules of the fiqh of priority. When we say fiqh of priority, you want to remember that the word fiqh, for example, the word fiqh and the priorities, there are general guidelines that regulate, well, what makes this more important than that? Why is this more important than that issue? And what are the regulations to it? We're in the beginning. We're going to be talking about the general evidences, or the general, let me say, guidelines. That's going to be more type of thing, where we're going to be going into, I would say, universal maxims of laws. We're going to be talking about Islamic principles, just so that we would give you, it's not going to be very detailed, but it's going to be in detail so that we would understand where does segment 2 come from. Segment 2, so this is segment 1, and plus that, the PowerPoint that I was showing. And then segment 2, this is going to be the details, which is the packet that you have with you. These are going to be the details, inshallah. And then they're going to be, as you can see, they're done in boxes in order to help us understand that webbing style, especially for those that are visual learners. We're going to talk about the details of a woman's life with her husband, with the children, at home, what comes first, and how is that even all designed when it comes to children. What comes first in children's issues, and what goes second? How do we deal with that? And then when we speak about the details of the details of household, how do we make that our house a home? How do we work out our priorities? The class is going to focus a lot on issues that relate to married women, specifically women with children, women that are working, women that have so many different things, and especially women that are working or even living in the West, just because there's so many different things that are required from you, and you don't really get a lot of help from family. In different countries, they would get the family and the in-laws actually pitching in, helping. So we'll be commenting on that as well. And we'll also be talking about certain things that relate to feminism, and right now the issue of women's rights and men's rights. We'll be commenting on that as well, and we'll be talking about the issue of mercy and love, and how do we get that in when sometimes our life becomes very intertwined, where we're talking about rights and at the same time we're discussing mercy and love. Does it vanish when we're talking about our rights? How does it go? So this is going to be segment 3. That part is going to be segment 3. And then in segment 1, we'll be discussing, you could say, the math behind these priorities and how they're designed. So in segment 1, this is going to be segment 1, inshallah, and we're going to be focusing generally on these PowerPoints. So to start, when we say women's fiqh of priority, we're going to be taking every single word in order to explain it. We discuss the issue of women, what we mean, and which women are targeted, or which women are going to be discussed in this class. This study, a study that I learned from a book for Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, but his study was more working on the Islamic movements, and I claim that this is, at least from what I know, I did not come across a women's fiqh of priority, women's fiqh of priority study done yet. I did not come across something that did it in that webbing style. When we say fiqh, fiqh actually means to understand, and fiqh is a study. It's a science. When you say fiqh, you're actually discussing the science that teaches or that specialized in deriving rulings from the different evidences of Islam. The different evidences of Islam, so the different evidences of Islam include different details that are mentioned in the Quran, for example, or Sunnah, or probably the words of the Sahaba, etc., and the list goes on and on. When we say fiqh, it's very important to understand that fiqh stands on evidences that are mainly textual evidences that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taught the Prophet ﷺ or were revealed in the Quran. In other words, it's not dependent on what I think and what you think. It's not an issue of culture. It's not an issue of this is how I feel about it. Unfortunately, there are many out there that think that I believe Islam says this. Where did you get this from? No, you go back to Quran and Sunnah. It's not an interpretation that you invent. When we talk about priorities, we're talking about regarding something maybe more important than another thing. But of course, when we're talking about Islam, it's very important to understand that, okay, now I'm going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out for me to understand. How do I see the world? How do I see the world? How do I prioritize my responsibilities? Where do I, as a woman, and especially when we're looking at our lifestyle right now, with women actually right now engaging in working and engaging in a lot of the materialistic, or let me say capitalist lifestyle, that becomes very hard for us to understand. How do I put my social lifestyle along with, which is the social part of me? How do I put all these different things together? When we say priority, it means that they're all important, but something is more important than the other. When we say priority, we're actually talking about considering certain things. At least this comes first. Don't miss out on that, and do less focus on the other part. What should my main focus be on in terms of, or in comparison to other things? Yes, I'm probably not doing a good job on that, but that's because I'm focusing on a certain priority. And this is something that we're all going to fall in. Remember, our responsibilities as women are too many. And because they're too many, we have to understand how do we put on what comes first. And inshallah, with the webbing, I'm telling you, inshallah, it's going to be very beneficial. And even the people that are online, you will see the web, inshallah, you will see the webbing, and you will have something visual for you to understand. This lecture is going to be uploaded on YouTube as well, for records. And of course, when we talk about priorities, there's so many different things to do. For sure, you're going to be behind on certain things. There's no doubt that you're going to be behind on certain things, but on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ask you to do more than what you can handle. But this class, inshallah, aims at understanding at least the most important things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want me to be short on, or to miss out on, and think that, okay, I'm doing everything. I want to understand what is the most important thing. For example, unfortunately, many women are focused on just making their houses clean and then not realizing that, wait a minute, did you look at your children? Did you teach your children? We're going to talk about how we work out those priorities. The resources that this lecture stands on, number one, maqasid al-sharia, the principles of Islam. When I say resources, of course, there's the general resources, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, the words of the Sahabi, the al-Istihsan, all these different things. But those are the principles. Those are the principles. So I'm not going to here make it a fiqh of or usul fiqh class or the principles of fiqh class. We're here just trying to understand the priorities and how they're laid out. All right, and how they're laid out. Number one is that maqasid al-sharia, the principles of Islam. What does that mean? We're going to talk about it in just a bit. Maqasid al-sharia, the principles of Islam, the Quran, Sunnah. They're not just laying out like that. Fiqhiyya, the general universal laws in fiqh. We're also going to talk about that. Now, scholars went and derived from the Quran and Sunnah the different rulings and laid them out in a canon style. A canon style to help us understand how we web different things in general laws. How we understand what does the Quran tell us and the Sunnah tell us in a canon style, which is what Islamic jurisprudence is generally is specialized in doing. Islamic principles. Remember, we're going to now talk about the resources that these Fiqh of Priorities go back to. Number one, Islamic principles. The Islamic principles, or let me say the Islamic laws or Islamic Sharia, stands on these five main principles. The preservance and the safety of these five categories. Number one, deen, nafs, ird, aql, and mal. What are those? Deen, to preserve the spirituality and the piety of, number one, the community, two, the individuals. Two, nafs, people's lives, the community's lives is a second priority. Ird, preserving people's lives, the communities, the general public, their life, and also the individual's life. So when they talk about Sharia being a threat and terror and all that, just understanding these Islamic principles is a very important thing, because Islamic Sharia stands on these five principles: the preservance of people's spirituality, the preservance of people's lives, the preservance of people's chastity, the preservance of people's minds, the preservance of people's wealth. The resources of Islam, we talked about that. One thing. Do you mind going back? Yep, I can go back. This is actually in your packet right here. Yeah, it's right there. The resources of Islam. When we say, for example, we go back to Quran, when we say we go back to him, or we go back to Sunnah, generally the hadith or the ayat are laid out, but then the scholars would read through these ayat and through these ahadith, and lay out what they derive the ruling that are mentioned in these different resources. Now, al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, we're trying to go back really fast so we can get to this. Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya are basically the five universal maxims of Islamic law. And these five, and they're right here in your packet, these five universal maxims of Islamic law, they're basically the five different categories that most of the rulings of fiqh go back to. Number one, that al-umur bi-maqasidiha, that everything or matters are only judged by their objectives. All right? 2, that harm shall be removed. 3, culture usage shall have the weight of law. What does that mean? Meaning even culture, if there isn't a text, acts as a resource in Islam.
Is that why you make an example?
Make an example. Let's say you sold me a house. Or let's do it in women's life. All right, in women's life. A woman got married, and then all of a sudden she discovered that the house isn't there. The family, for some weird reason, didn't talk about it, didn't discuss where's the living going to be, etc. All right? He can't say, well, she was supposed to be living at your home. No, because culture-wise, is that the man is supposed to provide the house. You see what I mean? Now let's say something else.
And then you will back up with the religious reason on the culture ones that she has the right to have
culture becomes a reference when there is no text, when there's no text mentioned in here.
Well, this is of course the positive culture thing that is not against the Sharia.
Once culture goes against or contradicts something in the religion, we reject the culture. Okay, we're talking about a culture where the culture does not reject the religion.
What happens when you have, like, for example, a lot of Arabic nations, and if you have an Arabic alim,
okay,
who is judging, using the cultural judgment,
absolutely,
using their own culture.
That's a very good point. If when we talk about, for example, an Arabic alim judging based on his perspective. Number one is that there's generally first there's the text that they go back to, that they're supposed to go back to in order to preserve the rulings from not necessarily being a personal opinion. All right. Number two is that can happen when there is, let's say, a family dispute. When there's a family dispute, that if you go to, let's say, a scholar that is a Arabic scholar and both couples are Somali, we would always go back to the scholar that is from your community. Always.
And so when people then say that, no, that
because al-'adatu muhakkima, because culture is a resource. So when in case we have a dispute between a husband and wife, we would tell them to go back to the people that understand their culture to rule within their culture. In fact, in fiqh we say al-hukm ala shay'in far'an an tasawwurihi, meaning whenever you want to give a ruling on something, it is actually branched from the way you perceive it, the way you understand it. So very important to actually go back to people that understand your culture. But of course, this is not to say that culture would be a reference over Sharia, over Islam. No, culture would be a reference if Islam itself refers you to culture. If Islam refers you to culture. And this actually acts, as you could see right here, it actually acts as one of the third laws. Al-'adatu muhakkima. Al-'urf. It actually is considered. So even when a man wants to get married to a woman, for example, the way and the details of dowry and all those different things, a lot of it we would say, how do you do it in your culture? In order to explain it. Even when we talk about the details, is a woman supposed to be spending on the household if she works? This is really important because the husband and the wife, they might want to dispute, and he might say, well, you're supposed to pay half of what you make. I'm supposed to be not paying anything, even if I was $1 million, even if I was a millionaire. There's actually different opinions between scholars on that. And the reason why scholars had differences of opinions on how much a woman would actually pay, there are actually 7 different opinions on this. The reason why they had differences of opinions is really because there is no text that says if a married woman is working, then she will pay half of her income, third of her income, or whatever. Scholars had different opinions on that. The reason why is because every culture has a different perspective. In fact, even let's take the Fiqh al-Maliki. In just one madhab on whether she pays half, whether she pays 1/3, or whether she pays based on the agreement. In Hanafi madhab, it's based on based on what they agreed on. All right, and that's why it's very important that when we look at this, having that much weight in fiqh, it's very important to do that marriage counseling before you get married in order to understand, okay, well, how do we understand some of the details? For example, money and how much I spend on it and how much I give from my income and all that. Go ahead.
Okay, so a little bit harder question. What happens then when you have, say, a husband from one culture and a wife from one culture?
When you have a husband and a wife from 2 different cultures.
Very distinctly different.
Very distinctly different. Number one, generally, it's not about, when we talk about marriage is not about who has the right of say. Although Islam considers that men have more the right of say, not to mean when we say that men more have the right of say, it doesn't mean that he has the right to condescend her. It doesn't mean that. We're going to lay that out later on. But it would mean that he would be the decision maker, the final decision maker. And that's why I would usually recommend, not from my own personal experience, my husband is Tunisian. I'm part Palestinian. Not from my own personal experience, but from my personal experience working with people from different cultures and marriage counseling with different cultures, I usually recommend people to marry from within their own culture. Because when you actually marry somebody outside of your culture, you're going to have a lot of different understandings and a lot of barriers in understanding one another. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that marriage working out,
I agree.
but I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would always recommend marry from within your culture, because it is already hard enough to have the common grounds of understanding. In fact, I'll actually even go farther than saying marry from within your own culture. I would say marry somebody that understands your language and marry somebody that understands your new culture. If you grew up in America, marry somebody that grew up in America.
This goes, I have a question. So
Yep.
I'm a convert to Islam.
Mhm.
And so when you said when you want to go to the scholar, go to someone that knows your culture,
Right.
so it's really hard to find an American scholar right here in the country.
Absolutely.
You know, so I have went to like several different sheikhs, you know, asking questions over the years of being married and with different situations that come up, and it's like, who do you stick with? You know, which one?
Well, let me tell you one thing. Although culture has a lot of weight in defining a lot of things in fiqh, but there are principles in Islamic law that we go back to. So it's not that they're inventing their own Islam. All right, it goes back, and those are very few things. Right? Those are very few things. But generally, I would recommend seeing a marriage counselor. The marriage counselor would help the couple understand how to work out their disagreements. And right now, there are studies on how to bring about the perceptions and the understandings closer. All right. So anyhow, we're going to talk about that later on. Hardship. The fourth one is that al-mashaqqa tajlibu at-taysir. hardship shall bring alleviation. In other words, when things get harder, they get harder, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not obligate something on you that you cannot handle. All right? Meaning for women, yes, the tasks are too many, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understanding priorities and in putting those in place, that's why il-mashaqqa tajlibu at-taysir. That's why when things get harder, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, focus on that first. That's your priority. Focus on that, and the details would be details. Al-yaqinu la yazulu bil-shak. Certainty shall be removed by doubt. So when you're in doubt about something, you go for what you're sure. That's a lot of things to say. When we say levels of prioritization, this is very important to mention that in Islam, like there's darurat, necessities, and there's the hajiyat. Darurat would be the preservation of the D-N-A-I-M that we mentioned, the deen, the nafs, the ird, the aql, the mal, right here in the beginning. The needs, if missed, it will cause hardship. And the improvements, tahsiniyat, luxury, and completeness, no hardships if missed. So we'll talk about that later on, inshallah. What is the legality? What is the evidence that in Islam there's that prioritization system in Islam? Number one is that if you go back to the Quran also has the pattern to tell us that the pattern of having something, that prioritizing pattern, is actually part of Quran or part of the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as part of Sharia. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَجَعَلْتُمْ سِقَايَةَ الْحَاجِّ وَعِمَارَةَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ كَمَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَجَاهَدَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ لَا يَسْتَوُونَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. What does that mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَجَعَلْتُمْ سِقَايَةَ الْحَاجِّ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is questioning they used to brag and actually say that they're giving food, they're giving water, they're giving the pilgrims all these different, in other words, community service. They're doing the community service. All right? And in other words, they're good. They're helping the poor, they're helping all the people, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, how can you, in other words, say that a person that believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believes in Judgment Day, does that jihad for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equal to somebody that is doing community service? Community service is good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying community service is not good. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that is not the priority. That is not the priority. The other part, or another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. What happened is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid that we would condescend or swear at their idols, so that in order to not have them swear at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The priority was to prevent the kuffar from bashing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if that meant leaving bashing their gods. Remember, if they would have condescended their gods, it would have could have been given a way to prevent others from worshipping those gods. Right? Because when you condescend their lifestyle, it could have been a way of quote unquote da'wah. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, don't do that type of what you might think it's da'wah, because it might actually bring harm, and then having them swear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's a response to ISIS too. Right? You don't attack even the Muslims. A bigger attack on Muslims. Or even get more people out of Islam. Thinking that, I'm making people practice Islam. No, you're getting more people outside of Islam. The other hadith, evidences from the sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the best siyam, that afdal al-siyam after Ramadan, the best siyam is the siyam of Shahrullah al-Muharram, month of Muharram. What does that mean? That there's the priority having fasting Shahr Ramadan, fasting the pillar. Even if you fasted all the year, that does not equal fasting Ramadan. The other part is that the Prophet ﷺ actually was asked, which is the best action which is the best action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favors, and the Prophet ﷺ said, praying on time. And then he was asked, then what? And then he said, birrul walidain, being good to your parents. Then he was asked, then what? And he said, doing jihad fi sabilillah. Now what does that mean? That in Islam, there are different levels. There's another story, is that the munafiqeen during the battle of Tabuk, the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, they were plotting against the Prophet ﷺ, and then Ubay ibn Salul actually said that he's going to expel نُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلَّ, of them and the worst of them out of Medina. Now some of the Sahaba thought, well, because of what he said, why don't we just bring an end to him? But the Prophet ﷺ said that he was fearing that it was going to be said, Muhammad is killing his friends. Why? Because there is the priority. He regarded what the media might say about the Prophet ﷺ and getting people afraid of Islam as a priority over stopping Ubay ibn Salul from attacking the Prophet ﷺ. All right? Now, and when we talk about prioritization, it's about balance. It's about getting the level of balance. Because remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentions, وَابْتَغِ فِي مَا أَتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. And consider, in other words, make your priority doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered you to do for the akhirah. But don't forget your share in this dunya. It's about balance. Well, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you on Judgment Day. And don't forget your share in this dunya. That's Surah Al-Qasas, ayah 77. In other words, being religious does not necessarily mean that you only pray and you only do rituals, but you actually do the balance. On the other hand, some Sahaba, Anas ibn Malik, actually mentioned that the three men came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they actually came to ask about the rituals of the Prophet ﷺ and how he was practicing his religiosity or his spirituality. So the first one actually said that they pray all night. The second one said that they fast all days. And then the third one said that he stays away from women, meaning that never gets married. And the Prophet ﷺ told them that no, it's about balance. It's about balance, and that even though he is a prophet, but he prays and lives a normal life, fasts and also does not fast other days, and also gets married. Certain guidelines for prioritization. This part is really important, but we're going to go over it really fast. Obligatory actions precede recommended and liked actions. So when we talk about general rules of having one action more important than another action, you want to remember that it's about first regarding the obligatory things, and then regarding the details, sunnah, and etc. Seeking high virtues precedes other less important virtues. That's straightforward. Concealing rituals precedes revealing them. Continual daily actions precedes the intermittent actions. Right? Of course. Consistent deeds. the things that you do on a daily basis are more important. Your child's schooling is more important than a soccer game, right? We're going to go more into that. Islamic creed precedes Sharia. This is a very important thing. When we say Islamic creed precedes Sharia, Sharia is more in, when we say Sharia here, we're actually talking about actions and rulings. All right? So rulings, no, why don't you take my coat?
No, it's just my hands are alive.
Okay.
I have my phone.
When we say Islamic creed, we're talking about aqidah, the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Believing in the prophets, believing in the messengers, believing in the Yawm al-Akhir, believing in the Malaika, believing in the Quran, etc. All those would make up al-Aqidah. Sharia would be the details. Is my daughter wearing hijab? Is she struggling with her hijab? What are those? Where should we put that on the map? What's a priority? Aqidah comes first. This is just laying out, you guys. We still didn't even start. All right. Ease precedes hardship. In other words, make it easy and don't look for harder things. I've had a number of women, they would become Muslim and then she's in a hurry to wear niqab and consider all the different details of bid'ah and all that, and then all of a sudden drops out because she went very hard. Take it easy. Take it easy. إن هذا الدين متين فأوغلوا فيه برفق.
When you convert, it also depends on the community that you're around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It depends on the community that you're around. They're telling you here's what you have to do. Absolutely. The common benefit precedes the less benefit, of course. الأكثر مصلحة أولى بالتقديم من الأقل مصلحة. Common benefit, meaning the more benefit, the things that you need more. Considering the harm is prior to the lesser evil. That's why Islam, considering the bigger harm, so when we look at the Prophet ﷺ, a man came to the masjid, and what did he do? He actually urinated in the masjid. What did the Sahaba do?
They wanted to kill him.
They wanted to attack. But the Prophet ﷺ said, دعوه وادنوا عليه ذنوبا من الماء. Just bring a bucket of water. What was the guy's response? Ya Allah, get me and Muhammad Jannah and don't let anybody else in. Why? Because he was a...
But I mean, even us as mothers, when we're potty training our kids, we're worried they're going to pee the floor, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we'll see right now, inshallah, when it comes to...
I'm serious. It's like, oh my God, I'm peeing in the musalla, let me run to the bathroom.
Continued and wide benefit is precedent over temporary and narrow benefit. Continued and wide benefit, like the continuous actions, الأولوية للأعمال ذات الصبغة المستمرة. When we look at the actions, but we still didn't get to the real butter yet.
I don't think we have that.
Yeah, no, you guys don't have that. When we get to the continued benefit, like the benefit that is continuous, that comes over the temporary and narrow benefit. Continued benefit, and this is something very important. Many girls will tell me, "Oh, I want to go for, let's say, do my internship," and she would get, like, let's say, a good proposal, all right? But she's so excited about the internship that she doesn't want to think about this good proposal that she's getting. And here we would say continued and wide benefit is precedent over the temporary and narrow benefit. What is that? That you should consider more over a narrow and a temporary benefit, which is that internship that or this job, this temporary job that you have.
Why would you consider it a temporary job? Maybe it's their life job.
But marriage is a life, it's a life matter. But marriage is a life matter. So you at least look into the proposal. At least look into the proposal. You see what I mean? Instead of saying, okay, well, right now this internship, and this is something a lot of times girls don't realize, and this is the pressure of feminism and pressure of the American society, and where it's kind of regarding that, for example, maybe it is, maybe some women, to them marriage is not a priority. But if she considers, or let me say, if she is in a need to get married, because marriage comes in 5 different rulings: halal, haram, right? Wajib, mubah, right? And makruh. Comes in 5 different rulings. If she's in a state where she's fearing haram on herself, then that would be continued and wide benefit. She has to look into it. She has to look into it. She's obligated to look into it. And it becomes even a bigger priority, a bigger priority than even her college degree. If she's in a state of fearing haram, or probably thinking that she might be in a fitna. The other part that brings the other question is a woman's life centered around her private life more than her public arena or her public life? Is this question imposed on us through feminist movements? Is the Muslim community now being influenced by non-Muslim secular resources to change its interpretation for Islam? These are important questions to ask, because unfortunately right now, let me get up for this one. Unfortunately right now we're not realizing that the feminist movement is actually pressuring a lot of our girls and pressuring the Muslim community and pressuring women in general to look at marriage life and to look at the relationship between men and women as if it's a relationship as they view it from the Darwin theory, that it's a struggle for survival or it's a struggle of the fittest. So unfortunately right now our homes are starting to be using that concept, are starting to use that concept as if the wife is in a struggle with her husband, and our homes became, rather than a home, more of a battle or a jungle. That she's trying to, because it's the struggle of the fittest, so she's trying to somehow fight for her right. Look at this lexicon that is being used. Fight for her right, rather than let's do it as it's supposed to be. Mawadda wa rahma. We're going to get there, inshallah. It's not fight for your right. It's supposed to be a home, not a battle, and not a jungle. The concept is infiltrating the minds of a lot of within the Muslim community, even where it's a fight. That's not the concept of Islam. We're going to talk about it later on, inshallah. And unfortunately, right now, we're getting a lot of people even saying that there's Islamic feminism. Nonsense. What is Islamic feminism? Is there misogyny that was practiced at one point? Yes. But we go back to Islam in order to go back to get a divine resource with a prophetic interpretation. We go back to Quran in order to get a divine resource. In order to understand the world based on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world. And it's not a jungle. It's not a fight. It's not a fight. We're going to talk about this later on, inshallah. And right now, it's so sad that right now there are many people actually bringing in the new interpretation in Islam. مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ بِهَا مِن سُلْطَانٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally, to answer some of the questions, is a woman's life centered around her private life? Is this question imposed on us through feminist movements? Is the Muslim community now being influenced by non-Muslim resources to change its interpretation for Islam? To answer the question, first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out a pattern laid out a pattern in this creation. And always the word لا يستوي, for example, الأعمى والبصير, the blind is not equal to the person that is the person that is capable of seeing. The people that know are not equal to the people that don't know. Always that pattern is laid out in order to tell us that the pattern of difference, or al-afdal, or having something that tafadul, not al-afdal, but al-tafadul, that one may have certain things and the other one does not have, is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created as a pattern in this world. When would they be equal? On the things that they're equal in. So in muslimah, religious part, she's equal to him. Jannah is for a salih, a salihah, and a salih. المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. And awliya means what? Awliya, support, and awliya can also mean authority. Alright? So if we say المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض, believing men and believing women, they're supporters or authority over one another. Now, when we actually say, when we talk about equity, they are equal, men and women are equal in the things that they're equal in. Muslim, Muslim, Salih, Salih, they'll get the Jannah. All right? But when it comes to responsibilities in this world, when it comes to responsibilities and rights, they would differ because each one is different than the other. A woman is different than the man, and the man is different. And because they're physically different, psychologically different, their responsibilities and their social responsibilities are different as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَ تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى. Generally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the ayah, in Surah Al-Ahzab, and that was more directed at the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. But when we say it's directed at the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, it does not mean that we don't take them as an example. This laid out a pattern of piety. What does the pattern of piety look like? If it's on the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, well, it should also include us as well. Now here, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and qarna, to have qarira, like to dwell in your own homes. وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَ تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى, and do not expose your beauty, your beauty the way that during the pre-prophetic era they were exposing. Al-Alusi, who was a scholar, there are actually different Alusis, but this is the scholar of tafsir. He wrote a book called Ruh al-Ma'ani. Ruh al-Ma'ani, it's a book of tafsir. And in his book he mentions that this is on all the qira'at, on all the variant readings, that this order is for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and plus for all the women, all the Muslim women to take as an example. In other words, when we talk about women, it is in Islam, it regards that women going in public is supposed to be the exception and not supposed to be the general rule. So in public, when we say in public, remember, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna al-mar'a awra." Women are awra. Awra meaning private. It's private. She's supposed to be covered and not exposed. فَإِذَا خَرَجَتْ مِنْ بَيْتِهَا اسْتَشْرَفَهَا الشَّيْطَانُ. Once she gets out of her home, shaitan then accompanies her, not necessarily accompanies her to in a condescending thing where she's always with a shaitan somewhere. Nope. That the people, the outside, the public men, once they see her, that's when they start trying to get trying to get somehow a hold of her, or trying to somehow dishonor her or do something that will harm her. So the Prophet ﷺ was laying this out, and at the same time, Islam considered that there are regulations for women going in public. If there weren't any regulations for women to go in public, then there wouldn't be a reason for the regulations. You know what I mean? The regulations were there in order to say that women are allowed to go in public. Women are allowed to go in public, and the hadith would be talking about the women that do not regard the regulations. So the meaning of hijab, for example, in the regulations that speak about hijab, and for example, when we talk about prevent having the women, for example, intermingle with men and all that, that would be what the hadith is referring to, which is that would be the part which that hadith would be referring to, which is that when women go out, the shaitan is accompanying them. Not that women have a shaitan with her. Go ahead.
Some people use from Maryam by Imam al-Jawzi. They use that he said there was once a time when women only leave their home for 3 instances.
That's actually a weak hadith. It's actually not a weak. In fact, it's even made up.
But yeah, isn't that just his opinion too? Like, isn't this a dalil for that?
So let me tell you one thing. It's not that a woman must only leave, or the good woman must only leave her house only for the grave or her husband's home. This is actually a mawdu'. This is actually mawdu', meaning fabricated, not weak but fabricated.
How could they spread that around?
Okay. Well, let me tell you one thing. Misogyny was something that is something that is prevalent internationally. It's not just in the Muslim world. It's an international thing. Misogyny, because it was prevalent internationally, you are going to have, just as people had fabricated a hadith talking about, for example, maybe the Khalifa himself, just to gain some favoritism from the government. You're going to have people trying to gain manhood by condescending women. So you will get people fabricating a hadith that regard women as nothing, or regard women as cannot leave the house, and that type of patriarchy. It did exist. But the most important thing, even though it did exist, it does not necessarily mean that we're not able to distinguish what Islam, or let me say the authentic interpretation of Islam, and what Islam really says.
So I'm asking because what you just said of like the fact that there are guidelines in Tamil, or the fact that you can go out. If
absolutely.
You could go out, there would be no reason for guidelines if you were just supposed to stay in your house for being born, your marriage, and your death. That this is then Dalil.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out the guidelines for leaving. In fact, there's a hadith where you're not even supposed to prevent the woman from going to the masjid. All right. Now, but at the same time, another hadith, that they should only go not fragrance, meaning not having perfume, meaning what the details, not to say, okay, she can have perfume, she can not have perfume, but she can go out without hijab. If going to the masjid requires these conditions, how is it with going to work? Right? If going to the masjid requires these conditions, going to work requires these conditions even more. Go ahead,
regarding the explanation of this hadith, would you back up your ruling or guidelines according to the culture, or not?
Say that again.
Let's say in here. You can't say, that woman should stay home all the time.
Okay, I'm not saying women should stay home all the time. We're here saying that there's let me say al-asl, and there's al-asl. Al-asl to mean al-'ada, to mean al-ittirad, meaning a common thing. When we say al-asl, that the general rule is that
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على السلام حي على السلام حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
all right. So when we say al-asl, we're talking about in the original stance. All right, in the original stance, that generally a woman is not supposed to be wandering around in public as a man generally is in public. You see what I mean? When we say that al-asl al-qarar fil bayt, it doesn't mean that she cannot be a doctor. But it would mean if she is a doctor, then she would be considering the regulations in hijab, considering the regulations in behavioral hijab. We're going to talk about that later on, inshallah. We're going to start this one. Okay.
What I mentioned, I thought it was Imam al-Jawzi's like opinion, or is it a weak hadith?
No, it's a weak hadith. It's fabricated, not weak.
Mm-hmm.
It's fabricated.
Yeah.
But Ibn al-Jawzi was one of the people that quoted it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
He
I thought it was
quoted
his
it, not
opinion,
that he made
and
it
not
up.
even
No.
that.
Ibn al-Jawzi was a scholar. He would not make up a hadith.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I
Ibn
thought it was
al-Jawzi,
like commentary.
No. He would not make up a hadith. He quoted that.
Okay.
Right? He quoted that. Ibn al-Jawzi is a great scholar.
Yeah, it's tafsir,
right?
especially,
He's a great scholar.
Yeah.
But he quoted that, not that he made up that hadith.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many fabricated hadith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never meant it as like something against Josie, but
He just quoted it.
well, I just thought it was like not even Sahih Bukhari is where you find like any like incorrectness, like I'm just saying like this is automatically correct without me factoring it.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين. Inshallah we'll pray Dhuhr and Asr due to the weather. Allahu Akbar. الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now we're going to continue, inshallah. Let me just comment on one thing. We're restarting. Just comment on one thing. You had mentioned that Ibn al-Jawzi mentions, for example, that a woman should not leave unless she's going to her grave and all that. It wasn't just Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi did not fabricate the hadith. Just wanted to say that, but he quoted the words that were considered as fabricated hadith. Now, having that being said, there were many fabricated hadith that were very misogynist, and some of them are very, very disgusting too. But we are still able, and that's not what I'm basing when I said that women generally are supposed to be their place, their normal place is really at home, not in public. I'm not basing it on that fabricated hadith, right? I'm basing it on the ayah. وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ. That's at least number one.
I just bring up that
right?
one because like what you were saying is perfect the real about that, and I've been hearing that one a lot.
Yep.
Like, on social
And
media.
like I said, that even though it's mentioned in the context of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, but it still is considered that we're supposed to be taking them as an example. When I say that women are, their first place is home, that actually comes even with the understanding of, with the concept of hijab. That doesn't mean that they are not to be professors, they are not to work outside, etc. But this is to say the priority, all right? That the priority is her home. And then the details comes as if she is capable of considering her hijab, considering that she is safe, then she can leave. Now, talking about a priority. Priority is home. Your priority is to stay safe. A woman's priority is to stay safe. A woman's priority is to be is to be in a place where she's honored. But once she goes public, she can go public if she regards the different regulations of going public. As another example, for example, I'm not basing what I just said on a non-authentic hadith, which is when Asma to Yazid ibn Sakan asked the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, well, men, the hadith actually has, I'm just going to summarize it because it's a long hadith, where she said, well, we're taking care of the children, we're doing, that is the men doing the jihad, doing all the different things. What about as us? And the Prophet ﷺ have you heard a woman that is better in asking the question about her matters of her faith, better than this woman? And then he told her, go and sarfi ayatuha al-mar'at, like go woman, and tell all the women that if a woman is good to her husband and seeking him to be content, and that is equal to all what men do. This hadith is daif. It is. This hadith is daif. But having it daif does not necessarily mean that other ahadith support that a woman generally is supposed to be considering obeying her husband and doing the details. We'll talk about that later on, inshallah. Muslim women can be in public if public regulations are considered. Number one, talk about hijab. And two, behavior, hijab in behavior, lowering the gaze, serious talk, reduce intermingling with men, and if it's not affecting her priorities at home. If it's not affecting the priorities at home. Now, the priorities in a woman's personal life, number one, considering self-piety before others. So in other words, you consider self, meaning your own self and your family's piety before you consider public's piety. This is not just, what do you mean public piety? Like you don't go make dawah outside when your own children need you to teach them.
Yeah. Activism,
Right?
right?
Of course.
Public speaker, but
Exactly.
kids are thrown in daycares.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. Your home is your number one priority. You don't go and, okay, I'm a doctor, but my kids, for example, are in daycare.
Yeah.
Or probably not getting the help that they need, and we'll talk about the help that they need later on. Or, for example, considering self-piety. You consider your own piety, your own islah, not just piety, but generally the issues that relate to your own self are a priority before you even start wanting to help others. So, for example, if you want to do good things, well, start with your husband. Start with yourself. Before you say you want to do community service or help out and volunteer here and there. Religious and livelihood support starts with those that you are responsible, for, and then expands to others. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Wabda biman ta'ud," and start. In other words, whether it's religious or even financial support, it starts with your own family first, and then expands to others. You don't donate if your own family is in need. Again, this is just really fast, okay? From the maxims of Islamic law is that, considering Islamic creed, we mentioned that one, prioritizing obligatory over sunnah, considering people's rights over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rights. You don't steal to pay for a donation. Of course. All right? تقديم المصلحة العامة على المصلحة الخاصة. Considering communities' rights over personal. This is considering communities' rights. المصلحة العامة المقدمة على المصلحة الخاصة. Communities' rights, meaning in public. For example, when we talk about public safety. All right, we talk about public safety, even though you can't say, okay, well, I want to have the freedom to drive the way I want. No, we consider communities' safety as a priority. This is just an example, of course. Removing harm precedes bringing benefit. Precedes bringing benefit. I know I spelled that wrong. Removing harm precedes bringing benefit.
You're talking like the hood. Like if like
removing harm precedes bringing benefit. And that's why it's very important that I remove the harm within my family. For example, if they're facing hardship or fixing my kids' aqidah, for example, that's a bigger harm than trying to say, okay, we need to get a better house for the $5,000 home, for example. Or let me give another example. Removing harm precedes bringing benefit. Many are willing to pay high mortgage than put their children in Islamic schools.
Yeah. You're
Right?
right.
Removing the harm that they're getting because of being in public schools is a priority over bringing a benefit when it comes to getting and paying all this mortgage. Many will tell you, I can't pay for an Islamic school, but they're paying lots of money for mortgage or even an expensive car.
Or even private schools over Islamic private schools, right?
Of course.
Like a regular international school.
Priorities in spirituality. Number one, priorities in spirituality. Al-Aqidah comes first. Always Islamic creed, the person's faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, faith in we mentioned that one. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا تدخل الجنة حتى تؤمنوا. Jannah, you cannot enter Jannah unless you believe. The Prophet's way and the Prophet's manhaj or the Prophet's method was always in first instilling aqidah inside the ummah. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ إِنَّا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونِ. Every single prophet and messenger that was sent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the revelation that there's no God worthy of worship but He. That is the first stance. At the same time, the Prophet ﷺ, a Sahabi, said, كنا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, said we were with the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. فتيانا حزاوة, we were young guys, still youth. فتعلمنا الإيمان قبل أن نتعلم القرآن. The Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ taught them faith before they even learned the Quran. This is really important because a lot of times with kids, they're just working on teaching the kids the Quran and memorizing the Quran, but the kids are not having their questions answered. And this is something that all communities will do, unfortunately. That they want to focus or even focus on having the girl to wear hijab, when it doesn't even instill within her faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What comes first? ثم تعلمنا القرآن فنزداد به إيمانا. So the Prophet ﷺ first taught them iman, first taught them faith, before he would even teach them the Quran. And because they learned faith before they learned the Quran, when they learned the Quran, learning the Quran was increasing their faith. It was on time. It was putting everything in place. فَإِنَّكُمُ الْيَوْمَ تَعْلَمُونَ الْقُرْآنَ قَبْلَ الْإِيمَانِ. So you guys are learning Quran before you even learn the iman. What happens? You basically lose it. You didn't even have it in place. The other part, إصلاح القلوب مقدما على أعمال الجوارح. Having the spiritual correction comes precedent or comes before working on the details of halal haram. Go ahead.
So let's say if you have a convert, correction. Is it, why do we always say, hey, you need to work?
That's wrong. Of course. I don't want to say that when a person becomes a Muslim, I wouldn't necessarily say the last thing is to put on hijab. All right, that's We don't necessarily say the last thing is to put on hijab, but إن هذا الدين متين فأوغلوا فيه بله. This Islam is a solid religion. You don't start with everything, taking everything all at once. And we're going to look at in just a bit, see some things. If you look at this hadith as an example, ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. Leaving forbidden matters precedes doing obligatory matters. In other words, first let her work and mentor her to leave, for example, the haram lifestyle that she's living, and it starts with the kaba'ir, the major sins. Don't start with the minor sins.
You mean the major sins?
Major sins.
Before the obligatory, or just any?
Major sins before the obligatory. Before the obligatory.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, like, there are some,
like, for
who
example,
will say something like, the brother, I mean, I've never heard someone say this, but like, the brother swears his salat will not be accepted. He shouldn't even bother with salat until he can fix himself. Someone will say that. So
no, his salah will correct him.
That's not
that's not right.
Instance which
no, his salah will correct him. Even if they are doing major sins, salah is a pillar.
Yeah.
All right? But when we say leaving forbidden matters comes prior to doing the obligatory things. Meaning, for example, when we're talking about mentoring people, it starts with helping them leave the major sins, for example. Leaving major sins like leaving drinking or zina, etc. Leave that, and that will give them that support in order to go up the ladder, that ladder of iman gradually. Not to start out with qiyam al-layl. Tell them, oh, do qiyam al-layl and it'll help you leave that. It might help them leave haram. It might. But leave and work on leaving the muharramat, the major sins, and that will bring in the iman. All right. Prioritizing the fara'id. We don't stay up late at night doing qiyam al-layl and miss out on salat al-fajr. All right. And at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ actually forbid women from fasting if that was going to let her husband, for example, if he wasn't ready for her fasting, right? Even though she's doing something a sunnah, but obeying her husband is obligatory, and being there for her husband is obligatory. There are so many different regulations, but I'm just going to go over it really fast. Even though there's so many important things here. When it comes to community considerations, when we're looking at what should I consider as a priority, it first comes تقديم المصلحة المتيقنة على المصلحة المضمونة, meaning considering the benefit that you are sure of comes precedent over the benefit that you are not sure of. And we're going to talk about those in detail in just a bit, inshallah. تقديم المصلحة الكبيرة على المصلحة الصغيرة. The big benefit and is precedent over the smaller benefit. تقديم مصلحة الجماعة على مصلحة الفرد. The family benefit, for example, the group benefit is more important than the personal benefit. Let me give you an example for family. For example, when we say that الكبيرة على الصغيرة, for example, when the communities, our family, the benefit for our family, financial benefit, for example, one of my children wants a toy, the Wii, for example. All right, he wants the Wii. and I know that he's got most of his brothers can't focus like him. All right? And you can't control the we, so that way you'll say, you know what? Me having 3 of his brothers, they can't focus if I had that. Or teenagers that I can't control if the we was in our house, would be more important to consider than that 9-year-old boy who I can control to not use the we. So the best thing is to do what? Not get it because of the bigger benefit. As an example, تقدم المصلحة تكثر على المصلحة القلة. We mentioned that one. Considering the core over appearance. Considering the core over the appearance. The principle. إن الله لا ينظر. The Prophet ﷺ said, إن الله لا ينظر إلى أجسادكم ولا إلى صوركم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم. Considering the core over the appearance. A lot of times, people are focusing on the appearance or focusing, yeah, my daughter's wearing hijab, but she's struggling with her Islam. Why? Because we're focusing more on the appearance rather than focusing on the aqidah, raising them with aqidah, answering the question. Omitting evil is prioritized over bringing favors. Now, generally, evil is in different ways. Remember this one? Right here? So the evil, we look at the deen, nafs, ird, aql, mal. Alright, let's look at it. I'm going to take it for you guys.
Can I mention something?
Yep, sure.
So I was training, I was wondering, you're talking about condos and stuff like that. So I've been Muslim for 10 years now. And when you talk about the outside appearance opposed to the inside appearance, like, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for me to wear hijab. But until now, I struggle with my brain. Changing my whole mindset of the way you used to think to the way you're supposed to think as a Muslim.
You know, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Thinking, you
know, unfortunately, Jamila, I love the fact that you actually brought that up.
Sorry,
You
I'm
said
sorry,
that.
guys.
No, I love the fact that you brought that
They
up.
gave me
therapy
bags of
to get through
hijab,
stuff right now,
and I was more than happy to wear them.
Yeah.
And I never had a problem with it. But I was still making shak, and no one taught me what shak was. I didn't know what tawheed was until a couple of years ago. And I eventually moved away from that naturally, alhamdulillah, but I was still making shak. I still read, like, that kind of thing. No one told me that was shak.
Right.
And not one
You know,
time.
unfortunately, I would want to blame a lot of different areas why many actually leave Islam, because the community is more focusing on the outside and the appearance than actually focusing on the inside. And unfortunately, the masajid, I mean, this I must admit, I do feel that the masajid are not doing their job in teaching Islam, in teaching even the seerah, for example, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, or the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, or Islam, or the details of Islam. Not to mention that you would see more of khutab al-Jum'ah, I would say bashing women for not, for example, wearing hijab, than actually correcting aqidah or something in the creed, or talking about Islam and how the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, or even bringing me closer to Islam. Unfortunately, this is something that you even as women, I think women have a bigger struggle than men, because even getting their questions answered one-on-one,
Yeah,
it's very hard.
That's what I said.
It's very hard.
Which sheikh do you go to?
Which sheikh do you go
How
to?
do you contact?
How do you contact?
What is
And even when you sit with the sheikh, is always, somewhere up there. I'll tell you guys a very funny thing. All right, this is really funny. When I used to study in the Islamic university, all girls had a very utopian, this is real, very utopian understanding of Islam. Very utopian. Unlike the guys, they didn't have this utopian understanding of Islam. So in the girls, one of my professors actually used to make fun of us and used to say that when a guy would go and ask for the girl's hand, she's all of a sudden speaking in Fusha. Did she think that being religious only means you speak in Fusha? And guess what? I wasn't myself. I wasn't myself. I was not, what is the word that I should use? But I wasn't immune to this utopian understanding myself. And when I got married, yeah, no, I spoke Fusha because my husband actually comes from a different accent, so that's understood. But when I got married, I told my husband, "أحبك في الله." I love you for the sake of Allah.
What a love story. That's so romantic.
Well, my husband's response was, قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة.
Oh my God.
He was trying to tell me what kind of a utopian understanding do you have. So he just said, قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. Now, the details, unfortunately, when we see the women, because of that distance from the scholars, a lot of times they don't get to see that being a mu'minah does not necessarily mean that you isolate yourself from your children, your husband. And how do I actually put Islam into practice? And that's, inshallah, we're going to be talking about that in just a bit. Inshallah. Again, this is just
Not the butter yet.
not the butter. This is just.
Come on.
This is.
When do we get to the butter? It's 2 o'clock.
Yeah, inshallah, right now. All right. So the other part is when harm and benefit contradict. When harm and benefit contradict, we look at the consideration is going to be the major effect. Consideration is for the major effect. Like like for example, is there any benefit from selling khamr, liquor? Yes, there is. Right? There's some financial benefit. Make money. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarded that benefit is worthless when we look at the amount of harm it brings. When we look at the amount of harm it brings. The laws of priority in family, your family precedes the community benefit. Look at this. It's flipped. Because generally, the community benefit generally comes before the individual benefit. But when it comes to your own family, your family precedes the community benefit. Your focus should be on your family. Your focus should be on your family and not the other way around. Now we go to the butter. Ready? Okay. Now all the stuff that I was talking about were just general laws. Those were kind of like when you're studying the math, and then now we go for the real numbers. All right. The guidelines for the how we regard the priorities and all that you have to keep in mind, because we're going to be working it out. But before we start that, I just want you to I am. This was aqd is supposed to be before. This is a mistake. D-N-A-I-M. Yep. Deen, nafs, aql, ird, and mid. This is a mistake here, right? So I want you guys to remember that, because we're going to be applying that same rule here. Ready? Let's do it. We're going to apply the same rule here. Oh, how do you do this? So generally, كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. What is that? That's a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that every one of you is responsible, and he's responsible for for the responsibility, meaning responsible for the details of managing this responsibility. How do we manage this responsibility? Number one, I want you to apply the same DNAIM rule on this. If you look at it, DNAIM, so it first starts with كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. It first starts with having and trying to understand, okay, the priorities in life. How does it go? Number one is that you've got the husband, you've got the children, you've got the house. What comes first? As a woman, you've got the children, the husband, the children, and the house. The husband comes first. Yes, it is. Okay.
Put your mark. Is it on?
Yeah, it is.
You know, however, yeah. My husband, he was my husband dropped me off with a water. Yeah. Pretty far. Normally it's pretty private. But the weather, it's some hot hour.
It's okay. All right. So when we look at Deen, when we look at so now generally the responsibilities comes in terms of priority. First, it's the husband. That's number one priority based on the hadith.
Okay.
All right. Husband is a priority based on the hadith. Then it's the children. Then it's the house. In terms of priorities. All right. Let's look at dealing with the husband. What comes as a priority in dealing with the husband? Number one, DNAIM. Ready? DNAIM. This is the way we go into order when it comes to prioritizing. When I deal with my husband, what comes first? Number one, let's talk about the religion. Piety, that's a priority. Piety as a priority. Piety before marriage, you're supposed to consider the husband's piety over anything else. Let's apply the rule here. A sister got a man that has PhD in electrical engineering. He's got lots of money. Yet, he has a problem with women that's affecting his deen. Now, when we want to weigh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, wait a minute, إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. You look at deen as a priority. And then you see the details in this category. You weigh them out. All right? Now, deen as a priority, إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. Now, رِضَى الخلق and being content over their akhlaq, meaning what over akhlaq? Akhlaq includes two things. Behavior in general, attitude, and also the culture that they come from. Because that makes up the akhlaq. What defines akhlaq? Who defines akhlaq? They're general akhlaq, all right? And they're the akhlaq that you generally get from the culture, from the Sahabi, when the Prophet ﷺ was with the Sahabi told him, إِنَّ فِيكَ خُلُقًا يُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. There's a khuluq, there's a manner in you that Allah and His Messenger love. And he said, what is it? He said, al-hilm wal-ana. Al-hilm wal-ana. Forbearing and gentleness. So the Sahabi asked a question, and he said, is this a manner I taught myself? Or is this something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within me? Meaning what? Is it part of my DNA? Or is this something that I taught myself? أخلقا تخلقت به أم جبلني الله عليه. The Prophet ﷺ said, بل جبلك الله عليه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it within you. Here's a khuluq. Khuluq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created with certain attitudes that come within the person, and there are certain attitudes that they can acquire. Being manly in the Kurdish culture is totally different than being manly in the American culture, right? And the definition of a manly man in America is totally different than the definition of a manly man in the Middle East. Totally different. What is manly? The definition of being feminine in America is different than the definition of being feminine in the Middle East or in Pakistan, right? And it becomes part of the akhlaq. It's not part of muru'ah, and this is it's very sad to actually say that we rarely talk about muru'ah. What is muru'ah? Muru'ah is acting in dignity. Halaqat don't talk about that anymore, because then they'll call you're being judgmental. Muru'ah, dignity. Acting with hayba, acting with honor. That's part of being manly. That's part of being a good Muslim. Muru'ah. Now, when we look at piety, to come back to it, so that we won't get off track. When we look at piety, we're talking about deen, number one. Then, remember, when we look at piety, and looking at the piety comes with getting support to that religiosity. Him supporting her religiosity is the priority. Her supporting his religiosity is the priority. Why are we considering deen? We're considering deen because deen is the lens that you see through the world around you. Because deen is what is going to determine how you want to live your life. So we're looking at piety as a priority. Now, a question. If we look at piety as a priority, should we just say, I just want a religious man, I don't care about the money, I don't care about all the details and all that? No. Because it comes with it. Because it comes with it. Remember, in order to have a stable marriage, you can't just say, okay, I want a religious man without the details. Because remember, even Asma bint Abi Bakr, Asma, the daughter of Bakr Siddiq, she got divorced from Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. Who's Zubayr? Zubayr is one of the 10 people promised Jannah. One of the 10 people promised Jannah. She was Asma bint Abi Bakr, the daughter of Abu Bakr Siddiq. Right? Their marriage didn't work out. Their marriage didn't work out. What is that supposed to tell us? I mean, not necessarily because... What was that?
Why didn't it work out? You know?
Well, we don't necessarily have all the details, but one thing was that Zubayr was very jealous. He was a very jealous man. All right? Even though Asma bint Abi Bakr, when she was with the Prophet ﷺ, at one point the Prophet ﷺ saw her. And the Prophet ﷺ offered her a ride. But she said, I did not go with him because I know that you're a jealous person like that. So Zubayr, he just said, you know, you doing all the work that you were doing was even harder on me than you going with the Prophet ﷺ. Regardless, all right? Just just to keep in mind, when we talk about religiosity, it's not enough to make a balanced marriage. There are so many other details in order to make a balanced marriage. And those other details include the nafs, include the aql, include the ird, include the mal. Ird meaning children and all that. All those different things, that's to make a balanced marriage. You can't say, okay, it's just a religious person. No. If you're going to clash with this religious person, his mentality can be an obstacle. Or even the money. Another Sahabiya actually came and she actually said about her husband, لا أعيب عليه لا في خلق ولا في دين. I don't complain of him, not because of his religiosity and not of his deed. إلا أني أكره الكفر في الإسلام. But I would hate to become kafir after being Muslim. Not that you would become kafir after being Muslim to literally leave Islam, but because she knew that being good to the husband was so important that it was like you're having the akhlaq of a kafir. All right. So the Prophet ﷺ told her, can you return back his dowry, which is hadiqa, with the garden? And she did. But this is just an idea. And another hadith that actually explains that the reason why she wanted to return the hadiqa, or why she wanted to get a khulu' from her husband, was because she said in one of the narrations that it said that she saw the way that he would come in with other guys, and she did not see that he was as manly as the rest. Didn't see his appearance was not as manly as the rest. Whatever. In the end, is that we look at so many different things in order to get to the balance. When we say the piety, remember, al-mu'minun wal-mu'minatu ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd. Al-mu'minun, believing men and believing women, are all supporters for one another. When we say supporters for one another, so the word awliya also means authority. When we look at الرجال قوامون على النساء, take the different ayat together. بعضهم أولياء بعض and يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر. They order for what is good. When we say order for what is good, doesn't necessarily mean giving orders, yelling and giving orders. يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر, meaning that the person understands that religious support actually means that we enhance each other's iman, we enhance each other's faith by bringing to one another what's haqq and what's batil, and clarifying that. Clarifying what's haqq and letting our ego on a side. Because al-mu'minuna wal-mu'minat, it's about having faith. It's supposed to be, the priority is to have him have deen. Two, when we get married, to support each other's deen. Three, by ordering each other for what's right and forbidding each other from haram things. Whatever the tools were, the tools has a different discussion. Because the tools, we're going to talk about it later on when we get to page 4. Piety, generally in life. But when we say salah and piety, we're actually going to talk about obedience. Because the word salah actually means submission. When we say somebody is salih, he's submitting to who? Submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not submitting to his own whims and desires. So when we say piety, we're talking about, remember, obedience to the husband is part of worship. What does that mean? We're going to have our own jihad fighting this. We're going to have our own ego fighting this. And this is a word to the feminists. Because the feminists, the feminists would regard that it's about struggling for the fittest. And that you're supposed to know. And that the culture made these patriarchal ways of dealing with one another, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ actually said the word طاعة المرأة لزوجها. Whether feminists like it or they don't. No, it's called obedience. Just like you obey the laws at work. You call it obeying laws at school. You call it obey the laws at...
Is there any limitation for this?
Any limitation? الطاعة في المعروف. الطاعة في المعروف. Of course.
Whatever the details.
No, الطاعة في المعروف. What is المعروف? المعروف has two meanings. المعروف, one, what is good? Two, المعروف, meaning what is known in that culture. Here comes back the culture again.
And then when you have two different cultures.
You're going to have two different cultures. All right? المعروف.
Choose what's the first one.
المعروف to mean one, what is good. You generally know, for example, معروف, helping the husband, it's معروف. General goodness, we would all agree on, regardless of any faith. The other type of معروف is the معروف that is known within that culture. Within that culture, they would know, for example, in some cultures that if the husband, for example, asked for coffee, that you would make him coffee. For example, all right? In the American culture, no, you would have to say please.
Well, I was just going to ask that, like my husband, it's normal in the culture that you go like with a tray and you bring like cold water. Now my husband doesn't expect that, alhamdulillah, I'm not talking ice cold water, but he'll phrase things in a way that is really disrespectful. So like here, like what, you're not gonna go bring your husband some water? Like the phrasing is really disrespectful here. Now I understand my husband understands me. But like what I then because of this, I would try more.
Okay, here's several things. Ta'a does not mean that the husband has the right to condescend his wife and disrespect.
Right, because in his culture it's not condescending at all. It's not even a little bit.
Okay. Generally, when we say condescending, regardless of the culture, putting anybody down is condescending no matter what culture you came from. Putting anybody down, calling them of a lesser thing is disrespectful, regardless of any culture, whether you're in Japan or whether you're in the US. If you are making fun of somebody, or if you are looking at somebody as if they are lesser than you, is condescending. Now, having that being said, is that when the man is required, or when the woman is required to do ta'ah, remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. Allahu Akbar. If they obey you, do not take advantage of that. Oh, it's not a game. Don't take advantage of that. فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. And then what? إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. What is إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا? Meaning that, this is in Surah An-Nisa. Alright? Meaning what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the men that even when they obey you, don't take advantage of it, that they're actually trying to do as much as they can in order to make you happy. To seek you to be content. فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. Don't take advantage of them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا is a threat. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا is a threat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. Verily, Allah is most high, most big. Meaning what? Why most high, most big? Because generally, when do you take advantage of somebody? When you see them less than you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding you, if you see them less than you, Inna Allah kana aliyan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most high. And when you belittle others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, kabira. He's most big. He's the most big. You see what I mean? So just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the women to obey their husbands, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does know that some men are going to take advantage of that feminine part that wants, because generally a woman enjoys making her husband happy. That's what she enjoys. Unless she's fed with all this feminist contamination, this is what I call it. This feminist contamination that's going to really pollute her and start making her think that, okay, it's about winning and flip the house into a jungle.
So
Seriously, this is what's happening right now. They're making it in, the laws of those theory of evolution and all that. They're making it even at home. Theory of evolution, where it's about the struggle for the fittest, and she's supposed to be at the end of the day, really making her husband trying to fight for his, just to say, bring me a cup of water, please.
Like in my example, like when my husband says that, it is in his culture. Same if he was to say, would you mind giving me a cup of water? Or hey, you're in the kitchen, would you mind please doing that? I'm thirsty. It'd be like him doing that. It's not in his culture condescending at all. It's just a language difference and a cultural difference. And so in that instance, when his intention is like pure, his intention is pure. He doesn't mean anything by it. And just because of that difference, is it more the woman's responsibility in that instance? More, not that one or the other, but more her responsibility to try and accommodate him more.
Okay, it's actually both. It's actually both that are supposed to accommodate one another. It's not just one. No, it's both. It's both. That's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the best of you is the one that has the best manners towards his wives. In other words, if we were to teach the fiqh of priority for men, it would be the woman first. It wouldn't be public too. You guys remember when we talked about women being in public? If we were to teach fiqh of priority for men, we would say, number one, women, your own wife. How to be good to your own wife. Seeking your wife's happiness is a priority. This would be the fiqh of priority for men too, not public. Even when it comes to the fiqh of priority, even for a man, it's supposed to be his home is a priority over the public, even for the man, because his home comes first. That when the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ibda biman ta'ul," and focus on the people that you are responsible for, he was telling who? He was telling the Sahabi. He was a male Sahabi. He wasn't a female Sahabi. He was telling a man, "Ibda biman ta'ul." Your priority is your own home. Whether we're talking about a man or a woman, your priority is your own home. Ibda biman ta'ul. So obedience to the husband, when we say, for example, in cases of dispute, inshallah, we're going to go into details. In cases of dispute, yes, they're both supposed to accommodate one another, but we're going to talk about the tongue and the different things later on, inshallah.
I had a quick question regarding the
Yep.
accommodation from the husband. Not me, alhamdulillah, but some sisters that I know, they have to accommodate their husband so much that they have to cook only his food in the house, not her food, because they're from different cultures, and he doesn't want anything else to eat, or that they put themselves so down that they get depressed. I say, subhanAllah,
No, this is
don't make
not
yourself like this.
This is not Islam. This is not Islam. Islam is about akhlaq. Islam is about akhlaq. And just like I said, that just like we are telling the woman that her husband is number one priority, we also, the Prophet ﷺ was telling the man that your wife is number one priority by telling you that the best Muslim is really the Muslim that is the best of his wife, the best of his wife. In other words, piety is really the piety of akhlaq. How are you at home? Many, they're so great and so professional in public, but at home, there's no professionalism at all in dealing with their wife. And the same thing, the woman in public may be just outstanding in public, but at home, it's a total different thing. Without us realizing, a lot of times we may be wearing masks in public, but at home, we're really acting our own selves. But the Prophet ﷺ said, no, the best of you are actually the people that have the best akhlaq at home, because it's easier to wear a temporary mask in public. It's easy to wear a temporary mask in public and to the strangers and act very nice and calm to strangers, and then we act our own selves at home. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling us the real akhlaq appears when you're at home. That's the real you. Your real piety, you weigh it, you rub it, you want to see if it's original, if it's authentic, when you see it at home. When we say obedience to the husband, comes a priority, الطاعة في المعروف. الطاعة في المعروف. It's about obedience to what is, two things like we mentioned. But when we say الطاعة, on a condition that the man does not ask for what she cannot handle. If she can't handle it, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ask and require us to do more than what we can handle, right? Even Allah, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not يكلف نفسا أكثر من وسعها, more than what it can bear, does any other human have the right to ask us to do more than what we can bear? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't even obligate that on us. الطاعة عبادة. Part of being good to the husband as a number one priority, that in itself is worship. So just remember, when we say الطاعة عبادة, this is to help us understand that when we speak of our priorities, home is the priority. Your own marriage life is your priority. And part of that marriage life, in order for it to be on a balanced level, there has to be some level of accommodation, some level of, what word should I use? Just like the Prophet ﷺ said, obedience, there is some level of khudu', some level of khudu', submission. There is. Because the ayah says, الرجال قوامون على النساء. الرجال قوامون على النساء. What is الرجال قوامون على النساء? الرجال, the ayah is clear. الرجال, that men are قوامون. The word is قوامون. قوامون, maintainers, protectors. What else? When we say قام على الشيء, meaning support. When we say this is about to fall, we need to put something in order to have it supported, in order for it not to fall. So قوامون على النساء. They're supposed to be protectors. قام, meaning to stand. أقام, to give the support. قوام, it's talking about an enhancement, a level of enhancement to the wife and to the women. So that enhancement, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made men to be in that position. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ, we're going to get that in just a bit, inshallah. We're going to get there, inshallah. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتُ الْغَيْبِ. We're going to get there, inshallah. The other part is in nafs. Within nafs, protecting in nafs, meaning, well, having the husband priority and looking at it from the nafs part. Nafs, self. The Prophet ﷺ, if he looks at her, she gets happiness into him. إذا نظر إليها سرت. She's looking good, she's looking happy. Remember, you are the mirror of the person that's seeing you. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually talked about the women, many women actually being in hellfire. Said, رأيت أكثركن أهل النار. I saw most of you or akthar, or most of the people in hellfire are women. Does that mean most of the people in Jannah are men? Does it? No. Al-Qurtubi actually responds to that and says that even most of the people in Jannah are women too. Women outnumber the men. Al-Qurtubi actually has a good explanation on that. But generally, the Prophet ﷺ was in a state of maw'id. The Prophet ﷺ was in a state, it was during the Eid, and the Prophet ﷺ was reminding the women encouraging them to do donations. And then he was telling them, well, do donations because I saw many of the women in hellfire. So this is to encourage them in order to get out. So they started, Bilal ibn Rabah was holding like a sack, and then they started donating their earrings and their toe rings and their finger rings and all that, and they started donating that. Yeah, they had toe rings too. And they started donating. Bilal ibn Rabah, those cosmetics, they were there. Right? They started donating those things. Now here, when we look at the Prophet ﷺ actually saying that رَأَيْتُ أَكْثَرْ كُنَّ أَهْلِ النَّارِ, then one of them asked, well, why? And he explained that يكثرن اللعن ويكثرن العشير. يكثرن اللعن, they're always damning things, cursing things. Why?
Asking questions is damning things.
Cursing things.
Literally cursing, like.
Cursing things.
Oh, they were literally.
Yeah.
Oh.
Literally cursing things. Why? A lot of times, maybe because of our physical weakness, so we use our tongue strength. Our tongue becomes our second sword. All right? So we start complaining of things. And generally, we as women, studies actually say that we are more bound to go into depression than men. Whether because of the hormones or postpartum depression, before the period, going into depression, all those different things. That's part of us. And that may get us into that fitna of cursing things, because we tend to actually have a low downs and low mood swings more common than men.
Are women accountable when they
Of
use their
course.
tongue in
Absolutely, they're accountable. Absolutely, they're accountable. Just like men are accountable. Just like men are accountable around women too.
I mean, like, for example, say she has postpartum depression or PMS, something like that. Really, actually medically significant, not just
Okay.
that mood.
Generally, if the person is in a sane state, they're able to consider their actions and they're able to know the consequences of their actions, they're held accountable. That becomes a fitna that they go through. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That becomes a fitna that they go through. Having that fitna does not give them the excuse to say, well, I'm going through depression, so now I have the excuse to drink. Nope. Doesn't give you the excuse to drink. But it actually enhances the fitna. So that's why we always make the dua, Ya Allah, don't make the fitna in my deen. Don't make the fitna in my deen. Because so many different things can make the fitna in your deen. Just like, for example, a woman that's married, all right, if her husband's there, the fitna is a lot less on her than a woman that has been divorced. Husband's not there. Yet, if she commits zina, is she held accountable or not? Yes, she is. And she's dealt with as a thayyib, as a person that has been married before. Even though she's facing a lot more fitna as a divorcee than a woman that's not a divorcee, and a woman that's with husband. But she's still held accountable. But the fitna is greater. Same thing. When we look at, for example, depression, does that take away the responsibility? No. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was saying, يُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ تُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ. You curse too much. Cursing what? Doesn't necessarily mean like saying bad words. No, not necessarily. Because the rest of the hadith explains it. يكفرن العشير. What is يكفرن العشير? They deny what the good things are around them, looking at things from the negative perspective. Looking at things from the negative perspective, where it's just always, how come nothing's working right? What happens is that the mood swing that they go through, it's not to justify it. It doesn't justify it. But the mood swing that we may go through might actually take us into looking at things from a negative perspective and seeing the world from a black lens or a dark lens. So the Prophet ﷺ said that becomes our own fitna, but it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. So here, إِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَيْهَا سَرَّتْ, part of that is to give them a smile. Remember, giving a smile is a sadaqah. How is it with your husband? You know, bigger sadaqah. وَإِذَا غَابَ عَنْهَا حَفَظَتْهُ فِي نَفْسِهَا وَمَالِهِ. Remember, it's talking about preserving the life, preserving the mind, preserving the chastity. Preserving the life, she's preserving the life, his own life, preserving his own health, preserving his own, the life, his own life, she's making it happier. She's making it also, حَفِظَتْهُ فِي نَفْسِهَا. She preserves her own self as well, from intermingling with other men, from intermingling with other men, or even other men dealing with her in a way that her husband might dislike. Right? This is part of حفظ النفس, preserving her own self. And it's actually having غيرة, jealousy for the man is at different levels. There's a غيرة محمودة. There's a غيرة, jealousy, that is liked. When it's jealousy that when somebody would see his wife doing something haram, for example, that he would be jealous from anybody, for example, seeing his wife without hijab, for example. That's a good jealousy. It's a positive jealousy. But the jealousy, al-madhmuma, is when it's overdoing it in jealousy. She's with her hijab and she's, mashallah, lowering her gaze and everything. No, I don't want you leaving the house at all. Don't even go to the masjid. It's غير مذموم. غير مذموم. It went beyond, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded the guidelines. Now you're asking for, it becomes tanattu. It becomes extremity. Extremism.
It's like oppression, right?
Extremism is oppression. It's though. Extremism is oppression, of course. Hafidatul ghaib, we're going to talk about that in just a bit, inshallah. And of course, without us realizing that personality of going into depression, the different reasons why we go through that, might actually make us not see the blessing. Seeing things from the negative eye. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to the other part. And I'm going to go to page 3. It just lets me scroll. All right, because it deals with the husband. All right. When we look at this part, remember when we looked at the one before, we were talking about that being with the husband and those details. But that actually takes us to the other part. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala خلقكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. What is that? That from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created from our own selves azwaja. Azwaja meaning spouses. Why? لتسكنوا, in order to attain tranquility. In other words, it's supposed to be a place of balance, not a jungle. Right? Wash away those feminist concepts. Not in Islam.
Sometimes it's a jungle, sometimes it's good, right?
Well, no, sukoon actually is beautiful. That's why the concept of Islam is is actually a concept of life.
I mean,
The
like
concept
every
of
marriage has
Islam.
fights and arguments, you know.
Oh, well, of course, of course. But the concept of Islam is bringing in sukoon. But the concept of feminism and the concept of those different movements, it's about making it a jump. It's about making it struggle for the fittest and all that. No, in Islam, no, don't go too far. It's about sukoon. It's about tranquility. It's about having a peace in mind and peace in heart and peace in the household. The children growing up in peace. There's no way that you can have that peace without having mawadda, love, and mercy. Love and mercy. We're going to talk about those right now. Mawadda, or in order to have the tranquility at home. Another ayah explains it and says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. Pay attention, you guys. The people on Facebook, pay attention. Now we're going to the real butter. All right? Now, the ayah actually generally says, وَمِنْ آيَةٍ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. All right? But how do we attain this sukoon, or this second? How do we attain this tranquility and this mawadda and rahmah? Number one, another ayah explains how we attain this second, this tranquility. And says, الرجال قوامون على النساء. الرجال قوامون على النساء. We mentioned الرجال, and it didn't say الذكور. In order for him, الرجال, in order for him to be in that level, he first has to be a man. He's not man enough to be responsible for the family. This does not include him. All right? He's not man enough to be responsible for the family, to take care. He's not man enough to actually let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be his number one priority and not his whims and desires. This is not talking about rijal, because remember in ayah it says, رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. And another ayah explains it. رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامُ الصَّلَاةِ. Real manhood in Islam is when they regard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the number one priority. الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Once they actually live up to being manly, then how do they live up to being manly? They're actually being in the level of qawama. At the same time, الرجال قوامون على النساء. If they, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Once we actually come to this explanation, الرجال قوامون على النساء, that men are قوامون على النساء. Then, as for the women, فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب. صالحات. What is salihah? Salah, generally obedience. When we say salah is obedience, salah is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and salah is generally freeing yourself from being obedient to your own whims and desires, or let me say it, be freeing yourself from being obedient to your ego. Because our ego is going to get in the way in order to tell us, who's he to tell me this? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, الصلاح الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Why الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات? Iman is related to القلب. Faith is related to the heart. But faith, the highest level of salah, is when that salah becomes in the beginning, salah, or in the beginning, piety, it starts with an imitation. Of course. من تشبه بقوم فهو منهم. All right? Yeah. Not just piety, but even bad akhlaq, it starts with imitation. And plus, we imitate the salihin. You read about the Anbiya. Why do you read about the Anbiya? To imitate them. The story starts there. How do you continue your part of the story? Right? You read about the Anbiya. Why? To imitate them. You read about the prophets. To imitate them. You read about the Sahaba. To imitate them. Right? All piety starts with imitating the Salihin. Just like Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum was more mentioned in a derogatory way. Those that imitate the fusaq, then they are part of them. All right? Now here, will and obedience, what does that have to do with anything? Once that obedience, once you have gotten used to being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it becomes a habit. It becomes who you are. In the beginning, you're still training. Al-Hasan al-Basri said, it took me 40 years to correct my akhlaq and to discipline myself until my nafs would do as I order it to do. In nafs has the capacity to even make you believe the wrong things and convince yourself that what you're doing is right, even though you're wrong. Now that's why when we talk about will and obedience, it's not that you're ordered to do this only, but you do it willingly. Ibad, you love it. It becomes part of who you are. It becomes you. You just can't imagine yourself doing something else. It becomes who you are. In the beginning, it's hard. In the beginning, you're struggling. It's not you. You feel that you, your ego, your culture, the culture that you lived with for a long time is battling this new obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's battling it. That's battling it. And that's why when we say will obedience, it's ta'a Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the beginning, your nafs is battling, but it isn't until is-salihah. What is the salah? When your obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcomes your will. Allahu Akbar. You've got the will. But when your will becomes the obedience itself. When your will, no, why do I pray? Because I enjoy it. That's another level. So don't do that utopian stuff. It takes time. All right? Hasan al-Basri said it took him 40 years. All right? I still didn't get there. All right? But I'm not even al-Hasan al-Basri. Hasan al-Basri, his nanny was Salama. Salama, the Prophet's wife. That was his nanny. All right? I'm not here being utopian. We're here talking about understanding the concept. So when we talk about the salah, it's about letting your own will be the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And making that be the discipline, your own akhlaq. Now, will or is-salah is really ta'a for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ta'a for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the number one priority. And that's why la ta'ata li makhluqin fi ma'siyati al-khalq. There's no obedience to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If somebody was gonna order you to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then part of ta'at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remember, because salah comes, remember, with obedience and submission. But part of salah, yes, there's ta'ah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's also ta'ah for the husband. But here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that our own ego is going to battle. So why should I obey him? So why should I obey him? Then the Prophet ﷺ tells the women that even when they're actually ordering the women to obey them, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Right here, here's the ayah. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Meaning what? When it comes to responsibilities within the home, indeed, there's not in Islam that total equity in terms of how many rights she has and how many responsibilities he's got, etc. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that they have the right for goodness, equal goodness. He would be good with her, she would be good with him. That they're equal on. They have the equal rights with having him acting good and she acting good. That's the, regardless of your culture, you're supposed to both act in piety and goodness. But وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. But there's an extra level, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. There's an extra responsibility over the women for the sake of the men. So again, meaning what? Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we say وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ, meaning that there's a little extra thing that I want the woman to do. What is that? That's ta'at. That's the obedience for the husband. That's the extra thing. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. That obedience part. Now, that doesn't mean that the man would take advantage of that. Remember, let's look at this hadith. عن جابر بن عبد الله قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. That was during Hajjat al-Wada. That was during the farewell ceremony. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي النِّسَاءِ. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with women. Meaning what? Take care of them. فَإِنَّكُمْ أَخَذْتُمُوهُنَّ بِأَمَانِ اللَّهِ. You took them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually considering you responsible over them. Meaning what? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ is here. This is the farewell Hajj. Word by word it was mentioned, recorded. The Prophet ﷺ said, اتقوا الله في النساء. Not because the women are ordered to obey you. Fear Allah. Real taqwa. And that's why when you want to get married, the first thing you want to look into is having a pious husband. Because if you cannot have the level of being pious, if he's not pious with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he's not pious towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's not going to be pious towards you. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي النِّسَاءِ فَإِنَّكُمْ أَخَذْتُمُوهُنَّ بِأَمَانِ اللَّهِ. You took them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting you responsible over them. Meaning that they are secure. By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually asking you to be the one taking care of them. وَاسْتَحْلَلْتُمْ فُرُوجَهُنَّ بِكَلِمَةِ اللَّهِ. And you regarded their private parts as halal with the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is through marriage. وَلَكُمْ عَلَيْهِنَّ أَلَّا يُطِئْنَ فُرُوشَكُمْ. That you have the right that they would not have anybody meaning to commit zina with them. Anybody doing any haram relationship with them. فَإِنْ فَعَلْنَ ذَلِكَ. And if they have done that, فَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ ضَرْبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ. If they did that, then let me just pause at فَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. The word is فَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, meaning strike, but the word غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ actually explains the word here. غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ right here. What is that? غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ means that it does lead, that it does not puncture, that it does not break any bones, that it does not leave bruises, it does not leave any marks. You guys, when did that? Even when he found her cheating. Even if she were found being cheating on him, and even if he hits her, these 5 categories: not puncture, not leave bruises, not leave marks, not leave any broken bones, not all that must apply, even if we're talking about a case of what? Cheating. How is it with probably disagreeing with him or whatever? If cheating, he's not allowed to leave any of these things. He's not allowed to beat in any of that way. And the Prophet explains that darb. And that's why to actually translate the word daraba as beating is actually wrong. Because beating, by definition, you're leaving bruises, marks, violence. In other words, that violence in Islam is not allowed whatsoever. بنص الحديث. By this hadith itself. Go ahead.
What do you think about the meaning of the word daraba? Some explanation that it says that daraba shay from wada'a, which is to place it somehow, somewhere, just to isolate it for a while, not for, not by hitting it.
Okay, so ضرب بلغة العرب, when we say ضرب في الأرض, it means something else. ضرب في الأرض, when we have that in context, would mean to travel.
Yeah.
All right? But when you say ضرب ضربا غير مبرح, meaning to strike lightly, and that's why غير مبرح would actually explain it. That's why when the Sahaba understood the ayah in the beginning, they thought that they can actually beat. So what happened is that the Prophet ﷺ said, I had 70 women, meaning a very large number of women, come to my home complaining that their husbands beat them. What did they do? Did they travel? Did they get out of the house? No, they didn't. No, the term that they understood was clear. It was like, they understood the Arabic very, very well. They didn't decide to just, oh, well, you know what, let me just leave the city. No, that was the understanding of Arabic. But then the Prophet ﷺ corrected their understanding. غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحْ. No, that's not how you handle discipline, or that's not how you handle the wrong thing that happened. The Prophet ﷺ, when he said ضَرْبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحْ, to mean that it was clear that no, it's not the striking that involves messing with the body or harming the body. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ explained it. Like, for example, with a miswak, something like it's more of a figurative strike or figurative thing than actually a beating, because that's totally haram. Even if she were to be cheating on him. Go ahead.
What do you think of when people interpret the ayat that is associated with, when it says that if you fear from your wife, then you can do these three things? That they say this means that you literally
the ayah
fear,
doesn't say
and the
if
man
you fear.
only fears.
The ayah doesn't say.
It doesn't.
It doesn't say if you fear.
Okay, I'm just asking because
it doesn't say if you fear.
The
ayah actually says that if they do nushuz,
I mean, that's at least very previously popular sheikh had at one point said that
let me tell you one thing.
It meant fear, and that it meant that you can
do
this.
Let me explain it. Let me explain
cheating.
it. Number one, no fear of cheating. You do.
That it only fears if his wife is cheating.
No. Let me explain it to you. Number one is that although scholars had different opinions on whether the man, if he wanted to correct, let me use the word correct rather than discipline. If the man wanted to correct the wrong thing that's happening from his wife, that he can فَعِظُهُنَّ نُجُرُهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, and then do the dab. All right? الوعظ meaning a good word. Good word, admonish them in a good way. Or اهجرهن في المضاجع, leaving the beds. Another hadith actually says وَلَا يهجر إلا في البيت. The hadith narrated by Muawiyah, that he should not do hujran, meaning do more like you could say cold shoulder, unless he does it at home. All right? Not to leave the house, that is. That's hadith narrated by Muawiyah. Now the other one is that if with dar. Scholars have different opinions on whether it has to be in order, meaning if this doesn't work, that is, if the kind words don't work, then he should give her a cold shoulder. If the cold shoulder doesn't work, then you can do the third. Scholars have different opinions on whether they should be in order or whether he should say, okay, well, based on the situation, I would want to use this. Now, generally, when we say correcting something that goes wrong, This is when there is nushuz taking place. What is nushuz? Nushuz is when the word nashaza actually means to mountain. To mountain. So once she is trying to somehow rebel within the household, meaning what? Making it look like a jungle. Simple things, and no, I want to get out and work, and I don't care what you say, etc. What happens? Making it a jungle at home. Mountain, rebel, that's when saying, well, wait a minute, we've got a priority here, and that priority is to make the house get balanced. Balancing the house becomes a priority. Go ahead.
I had a question about the hadith. I see that the hadith talks about even if they cheat, still at the end of the hadith it says that still men are providing. But I understood if someone like commits adultery within marriage, then that marriage becomes invalid right away.
Those are different details when it comes to bihar, when it comes to li'an. All right, li'an, not bihar, but li'an. That's a different detail. All right, but if let's say they committed, that's a different story. Let's say he didn't want it to come out public. All right, and that's a different story. What if he wanted to hide it from her, for example?
Oh, what is?
All right, that's a different. What if you don't want to take the step of li'an? All right. وَلَهُنَّ عَلَيْكُمْ رِزْقُهُنَّ وَكِسْوَتُهُنَّ. That they have the right for rizq, meaning what? That's real, or true man is the man that regards giving rizq and working to bring food and the utilities and call the payments. That's what makes the man, and that's what makes that's what makes the man responsible. And even in case when he is actually doing that responsibility, that she has the responsibility of maintaining the house. The other part, of course, when we talk about salih, a lot of details, but this is just in summary, inshallah. Qanitat, fasalihatu qanitat, the other category. Al-qunut is more like a spiritual thing. So, you know, that spiritual thing between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doing that dhikr. That's the second part. But remember that qunut, that level of qunut, comes with different types of dhikr. There's the dhikr, oral dhikr. And that's al-asl. Dhikr, subhanallah, walhamdulillah. Right? The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, what did he say in the hadith? When the Sahaba actually came, and they said, ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور. But the people that are rich, they got away with all the rewards. يصلون كما نصلي ويصومون كما نصوم. They pray like us, and they fast like us. But they get, because they're rich, they're buying off everything in Jannah. So the Prophet ﷺ tells them, don't you have something to actually donate? إن بكل تسبيحة صدقة. With every tasbihah, subhanallah, you do a sadaqah. And the whole thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, بكل تحميلة صدقة وأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر صدقة, ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad is all sadaqah. The Prophet ﷺ was correcting their understanding of good piety, that it's not that common understanding. It's not necessarily there's one currency. The Prophet ﷺ was telling them there are different types of currencies. There's a different currency that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks into, which is, notice in the beginning he was focusing on the oral dhikr. بكل تسبيحة صدقة بكل تحمير صدقة وأمر معروف والنهي عن المنكر. Those are all oral dhikr. There's the visual dhikr. يتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. Taking a moment of pondering in the great things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in the world around you. Visual dhikr. Behavioral dhikr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is really important, behavioral dhikr isn't the way you talk, the way you walk, what you look at, what you hear, all that is behavioral dhikr. Your 5 senses can make dhikr. How? What are you listening to? Are you making that hearing dhikr? What are you looking at? There's the behavioral dhikr. But notice that the ayah actually says وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. عِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ, and the servants of Ar-Rahman, يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, that they walk هَوْنًا. What is هَوْنًا? هَوْنًا, humble. They're about being humble. That walk, the gait, is a type of dhikr. Hijab, لباس التقوى يا بني آدم قد أنزلنا إليكم لباسا يواري سواتكم وريشا ولباس التقوى ذلك خير. لباس التقوى. What is لباس التقوى? It's an attire dhikr. Attire dhikr. Remember, when everybody else is trying to or afraid to actually say that they're Muslim, nobody's actually saying it in a louder voice than the Muslim woman. Yeah, maybe the woman doesn't do adhan in the masjid, but she's doing it out in public. Right? Not doing an adhan in the masjid, but she's doing adhan in public. She's walking with Allahu Akbar written all over her body. Right? A woman. Don't you, when you wear hijab? What is your hijab saying? Allahu Akbar. Right? Allahu Akbar. Of course, when we say qanitat, doing all that dhikr and all that ritual, spirituality, actually tells us when it comes to a priority, the Prophet ﷺ said that it is not permissible for a woman to fast when her husband is present unless she takes his permission. It's not just the fasting. It's not just the fasting. But generally, if you want to volunteer in the masjid, your husband thinks that, you know what, you're missing out on your children, you're missing out on your home, that's your number one priority. You don't have to do that. And it's not just there. But let's say the husband, being the leader of the household, suggested that, you know, why don't you forget about working and I'll do the working instead of our kids going to daycares. Instead of putting our kids in daycare, let's at least maintain the household first. That becomes a priority. Why? Because obeying the husband is a priority even over fasting. Even
This is just to clarify the fasting that
fasting.
no, sunnah,
Nafil, not faridah. In faridah, even if he tells you not to fast, nope, you don't obey him. All right. Qanitatun. Remember, when it comes to qanitat, supporting with dhikr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا, and order your family on salah. وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا, and have patience in giving them that order. Why? Because also qanitat, for a woman that is a qanita woman, meaning like you can say more like a spiritual woman, is also وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering the Prophet, order your family to do their salah and have patience. That's the same thing that a woman's responsibility would be, that she is maintaining the household spirituality. So first, she's maintaining her own spirituality. Second, she's maintaining the household spirituality in regarding, number one, the pillars of Islam. Then, this is a priority over this. What is the other one? Is that قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Protect yourself and your family from hellfire. What is that? That's in Sharia. The priority is Salah and the pillars of Islam. Sharia would be the second the detail. For example, when it comes to teaching children, or when it comes to, for example, considering piety, your husband's piety and your family's piety, the first thing that you want to look into is the pillars of Islam. And then you look at, is my daughter wearing hijab or is she not wearing hijab, and the other details. حافظات للغيب. حافظات للغيب. حافظات للغيب is trust, amana. What is حافظة? حافظة, preserving. الغيب, everything that's not seen. So حافظات للغيب, she would preserve her husband's privacies. What privacies? Privacies could be bad habits he's got. Privacies could be sins that he's doing. حافظات للغيب, let's look into the detail. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ وَأَخَذْنَ مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, to the people that are divorced, that are people that are actually on their way to getting divorced, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, how are you going to take, that is the dowry. But the word that I want to comment on is وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ means that you have revealed each other. You have revealed yourselves to one another. You revealed yourselves to one another. Meaning what? That al-ilaqa, the relationship, is awra in itself. It's a privacy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. They are an attire to you and you're an attire to them. What is libas? Libas is supposed to be a cover. You cover them and they cover you. Meaning what? Libas is an attire. Libas is a clothing. Libas, you cover. Meaning that when we talk about حافظة للغيب, we're actually looking at that she covers his privacies and he covers her privacies. Covering the privacies would mean covering the sins or the ugly habits that she or he might have. Each one, of course, remember, in public, we're totally different than in private. Right? At home, that's when we act our own selves. In public, that's when or in private, that's when we act our own selves. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually saying, حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ, in order to preserve the privacies that we usually reveal at home. We usually reveal at home our own privacies. We usually reveal and act ourselves at home. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually reminding us that they're attire to you and you're an attire to them. Unfortunately, we have many women that they take that as the gum that they chew on. Be sitting on the phone hours or talking about how their husbands throw their dirty socks everywhere and stuff. That's a husband's privacy. Don't share it. But what if he's oppressing her? لا ينهاكم الله عن الجهر بالسوء لا ينهاكم الله عن الجهر بالسوء من قول إلا من ظلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you are oppressed, you can reveal the oppression that you're going through only to those that have the authority or the qualification to help you. For example, you go to Qadi, the Qadi, tell him, my husband he keeps swearing at me, etc. Now, you're telling it to the person qualified in authority to uplift it, not your friends and sharing all the different privacies that your husband's doing at home. 2, just like the relationship is awra, a relationship is awra, meaning that it's a privacy, and his sins are privacy. The home is a privacy as well. When we say the home is a privacy, remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَدْخُلُوا بُيُوتًا غَيْرَ بُيُوتِكُمْ حَتَّى تَسْتَأْنِسُوا وَتُسَلِّمُوا عَلَى أَهْلِهَا ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, do not enter homes other than your homes until you feel that the person is willing to let you in. All right, now what do we take from that? We take from that the home and all homes are supposed to be places for privacy. Place for privacy, meaning that the woman, she's the one that is exposed to all those home privacies. And that's why it's very important to even teach your child that what happens at home, don't share it with others. Don't go telling people what mom and dad does and that mom and dad had a disagreement. Teach your children how to preserve the home privacies. And the other part, when it comes to amana and trust, remember that the trust on the whole family, the trust in the whole house. The other part is the trust when it comes to money. Generally, when a woman goes shopping, men don't know what's in the cart. Right? Do they? No. They just grab whatever is in front of them. They don't know what's in the cart. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually entrusted the woman that when she is actually using the money, they get the money, you spend it. But you spend it with haqq. You spend it bi amana. You spend it with comparing the priorities between needs and wants. الضرورات, تحسينيات, and الحاجات والحاجيات. That you look at the priorities and you consider that, okay, here's a priority. My priority is to make sure that we're buying the necessities if you can't afford it, for example. How are we putting those different things in place? Now,
Can we take a break after this?
yeah, we can take a break. Let me just
Finish what you're thinking.
okay. So the other part, inshallah, when it comes to the dealing with the husband, so this is a second. Al-mawadda wal-rahma actually continues later on. But we're going to stop right here just to take a short break, and we'll come back, inshallah. What? Oh, okay. So the food is there. So I'll stop this, and we'll come back, inshallah, in 15 minutes. In approximately 15 minutes, inshallah.
Are we planning on getting done at 5, sister?
Hopefully, inshallah. Inshallah, hopefully at 5. So we'll be back, inshallah, in 15 minutes. I'll end the video here, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Oops. And then we'll also do Q&A, live Facebook, and